My name is Alara. I'm 28 years old, and until recently, the only place I ever felt truly myself was amidst the scent of cedar dust and linseed oil in my grandfather's workshop. It was my sanctuary, my inheritance. Just 3 weeks after his funeral, my parents announced they were selling it, selling my grandfather's soul, to pay for my sister's dream wedding. What they didn't know was that inside the old, worn workbench they saw as junk, my grandfather had left me one last gift, a secret that was about to change everything. If you're watching this from somewhere and you've ever felt like the invisible child in your own family, drop a comment letting me know where you're viewing from. Before I tell you about the decision that blew my family apart, hit that like and subscribe button to hear more real stories about family betrayal and the strength it takes to fight for what's yours. Growing up, the hierarchy in my family was an unspoken, unshakable law. There was Lily, and then there was me. Lily was the sun, and I was the quiet moon orbiting her brilliant light. She had golden hair, and a smile that could charm a snake out of its skin. She was the golden child. I, on the other hand, was the quiet one, the girl who preferred the company of sawdust and wood planes in the garage, with my grandpa Henry, to playing with dolls. He was a master carpenter, a man whose hands could coax art from lifeless blocks of wood. He taught me how to read the grain, how to respect the tools, and how to listen to the story each piece of timber had to tell. To my parents, David and Karen, the difference between us was a source of constant frustration for them and quiet heartache for me. Lily's passions, dance, cheerleading, social media were celebrated. They were presentable, braggable. Every recital had my parents in the front row, camcorder in hand. Every trophy she won was polished and placed on the mantel in the living room. My passion, however, was treated as a dirty, inconvenient hobby. Alara, are you covered in sawdust again? My mother would sigh, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently on the kitchen counter. Why can't you be more like your sister? Find something clean. My father, a regional sales manager obsessed with appearances, was even less subtle. No respectable young man wants to date a girl who smells like a lumberyard, Alara, he once told me. His voice thick with disappointment after I'd spent a Saturday building a bookcase instead of going to the mall. I remember one year, for the middle school science fair, I spent a month meticulously building a scale model of a cantilever bridge out of balsa wood. I tested its structural integrity, wrote a detailed report, and was so proud when I won second place. When I brought the blue ribbon home, my father glanced at it and said, "Second place? Huh. Well, Lily's cheer squad just won the state regionals. We're taking her out for a steak dinner to celebrate." My bridge model was relegated to the garage the next day, while a giant framed photo of Lily in her cheer uniform went up on the living room wall. The injustice wasn't just emotional, it was financial. When Lily dented my father's new sedan at 17, they bought her a brand new convertible the following week to cheer her up. When my 15-year-old rust bucket of a car finally died, I worked double shifts at a local diner for 6 months to afford the repairs. When Lily chose an expensive private university out of state, my parents proudly drained their savings to cover her tuition, boasting to their friends about her ambition. When I chose a 2-year community college program for artisanal woodworking and design, they made it clear I was on my own. "That's not a real career, Alara. We're not wasting good money on a hobby," my father had stated, closing the discussion. The only person who ever truly saw me was Grandpa Henry. His workshop, a sturdy, detached building at the back of his property, was my haven. He never called my passion dirty, he called it a gift. "You have an artist's hands and a craftsman's soul, Alara," he'd say, his voice warm with a pride I never heard from my parents. "Don't you ever let anyone tell you that's not enough." He was the one who bought my first set of chisels, who taught me the art of the dovetail joint, who looked at my creations not as messes, but as masterpieces. His hands, gnarled and scarred from a lifetime of work, were the kindest hands I'd ever known. He taught me that the strongest joints are the ones that fit together perfectly, without force, and I think that's why I was always so hurt that I never seemed to fit with the rest of my family. My relationship with Lily was a delicate dance of forced smiles and unspoken resentment. She wasn't malicious, not actively. She was just so deeply absorbed in her own world that she never thought to look outside of it. She took our parents' favoritism for granted, the way one takes the air they breathe for granted. She'd casually ask to borrow money she never intended to repay, or borrow my clothes only to return them stained or not at all with a breezy, "Oh, you don't mind, do you, Alara?" that made it impossible to say no without causing a scene. The only person who stood between me and the crushing weight of my family's expectations was my grandfather. He was my champion, my mentor, my best friend. He understood that the workshop was more than just a building to me. It was a connection to him, a place where my worth was measured not by my social status, but by the skill in my hands and the passion in my heart. He had always told me, "One day, all of this will be yours, kiddo. Not because I'm giving it to you, but because you've earned it." I held on to those words like a lifeline, believing that as long as I had the workshop, I had a piece of him. I just never imagined I'd have to fight my own family to keep it. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning. It was my mother, her voice, a thin, reedy sound I didn't recognize. "Alara, it's your grandfather." My heart dropped before she even said the words. Grandpa Henry had suffered a massive stroke while working in his garden. He was gone before the paramedics even arrived. The world didn't just tilt on its axis, it shattered into a million pieces. The one person who had been my anchor, my true north, was ripped away without warning. The grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight in my chest that made it hard to breathe, a silent scream lodged in my throat. The funeral was a surreal performance. I stood in a daze, shaking hands and accepting condolences from people whose faces I couldn't register. I remember my parents taking center stage, their grief seeming performative and loud. My mother sobbed dramatically into a handkerchief, but her eyes were dry and restless, already scanning the room. My father gave a eulogy filled with generic platitudes about fishing trips that never happened, and a love of golf my grandfather never had. He was describing a stranger, a stock character from a movie, not the complex, kind, brilliant man who had raised me as much as he had. Lily, dressed in a designer black dress that looked more appropriate for a cocktail party, spent most of the time on her phone, texting furiously. She would occasionally dab at her perfectly made-up eyes with a tissue whenever she felt an older relative looking her way. She came up to me at one point, not to offer comfort, but to whisper, "Can you believe Aunt Carol is wearing that hat? It's hideous." It was as if the whole solemn occasion was just another social event for her to critique. Their grief was for show. Mine was a silent, hollow ache that felt bottomless. I was the one who went to the workshop the day after, the air still thick with his scent of cedar and pipe tobacco. I ran my hand over his workbench, the surface scarred and stained from a lifetime of creation. I saw the half-finished rocking horse he was making for a neighbor's grandchild, a tiny chisel lying beside it as if he'd just stepped away for a moment. The finality of it was unbearable. He wasn't just gone. His work was unfinished. His stories were left untold. In the week that followed, my parents' attention shifted with unnerving speed from mourning to managing the estate. Since Grandpa Henry's wife had passed years ago, his house and assets were left to his only child, my mother. This, of course, included the property the workshop sat on. "Don't you worry about a thing, sweetheart," my mother said, patting my arm with a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt condescending. "Your father and I will handle all the boring legal stuff. You just focus on, well, feeling better." I tried to talk to them about the workshop, my voice quiet but desperate. Grandpa always said he wanted me to have it. It was our special place. He wanted me to carry on his work. "Oh?" My mother exchanged a look with my father, a look that was part pity, part annoyance. "Oh, Elara, he was just being sweet to his favorite little helper. Of course, he didn't mean it legally. The workshop is part of the property. It all belongs to us now." Just a few days later, while the sympathy casseroles were still in the fridge, Lily made an announcement that felt like a slap in the face. Her boyfriend of 2 years, a slick investment banker named Marcus, had proposed. In the midst of our family's supposed grief, she held a dinner, flashed a diamond ring the size of a small planet, and gushed about her dream wedding. "It's going to be huge," she declared, her eyes sparkling. A destination wedding in Napa Valley. A designer dress, a five-star caterer. The works. It's what Grandpa would have wanted. He always wanted to see me happy. The way she co-opted his memory for her own materialistic dreams made my stomach turn. But I said nothing. I couldn't find the words. I retreated further into myself, spending every spare moment in the workshop, trying to find solace among the ghosts of my grandfather's projects. I started working on the unfinished rocking horse, determined to complete his final act of kindness. The steady rhythm of sanding and shaping the wood was the only thing that calmed the storm inside me. I believed that if I was quiet, if I didn't make waves, they would eventually forget about the workshop. They'd see it as my space and leave me to my grief and my craft. I thought that out of respect for Grandpa Henry, they would honor his unspoken wish. I was so naive. The catalyst for the storm had already happened with his passing. I just didn't realize the hurricane was already forming right over my head, and I was about to be caught in the eye of it. The shift was subtle at first, then brutally obvious. My family's grief evaporated, replaced by an obsessive focus on one thing: Lily's wedding. Our house became a headquarters for wedding planning. Coffee table books of floral arrangements and fabric swatches replaced family photos. Every conversation was about venues, guest lists, and budgets. Lily's dream wedding, it turned out, came with a nightmare price tag, and they seemed to believe that my grandfather's death had conveniently opened up a new line of credit. The first incident happened about 2 weeks after the funeral. I came home from my part-time job at the library to find Lily and my mother in the kitchen, huddled over a laptop, their faces a mixture of excitement and stress. "Oh, good, you're here," my mother said without looking up. "Lily's found the perfect venue in Napa, but the deposit is staggering. We're trying to figure out how to move some money around." Lily turned to me, a calculated sweetness in her eyes that always preceded a request. "I know Grandpa left you that small life insurance policy he took out for you when you were a baby," she began, her voice syrupy. "It's not much. Probably only a few thousand, but it would really help us secure the date. You know how much Grandpa adored Marcus. He would be so happy to contribute." I was stunned into silence. The policy was for $10,000, a safety net Grandpa had meticulously paid into for 25 years. We'd had a conversation about it on my last birthday. He'd told me, "This is your break glass in case of dream fund, Alara, for a down payment on a house or to officially launch your own business. It was not a deposit for a party." "Lily, I can't," I stammered, feeling my face flush. "Grandpa and I talked about it. He meant for me to use that for my future." "Oh." My mother's face hardened instantly. The facade of warmth vanished. "Alara, this is for your sister's future. Family helps family. This is not the time to be selfish." The word selfish was their favorite weapon against me. They wielded it whenever I failed to immediately comply with their wishes. The pressure was immense, their combined disappointment, a tangible force in the small kitchen. I ended up giving them half of it, $5,000, just to end the argument, feeling sick to my stomach as I wrote the check. That was my first mistake. It showed them I was willing to break. It confirmed their belief that my dreams were secondary to Lily's. The second incident was more personal, a violation that cut deeper than any amount of money. I had finished the rocking horse, sanding it to a buttery smoothness and staining it a warm honey color. The mane was carved with intricate detail. The eyes seemed to sparkle with life. It was beautiful, a perfect tribute to Grandpa. I was planning to deliver it to the neighbor's family that weekend. One afternoon, I walked into the workshop and found Lily posing for selfies with it, her sharp-heeled boots digging into the delicate, curved wood of the rockers, leaving small indentations. "Isn't this cute?" she said, pouting for her phone's camera. "It's perfect for the rustic chic vibe of my wedding decor. The photographer will love it for the getting ready shots." Before I could form a coherent sentence, she had convinced my father that it was a brilliant idea. He came in, beaming with pride at her creative vision. They were taking it to the wedding planner's office to use as a prop. My tribute, my grandfather's final project, was reduced to a set piece for her extravagant fantasy. When I protested, my voice trembling with rage, my father just rolled his eyes. "For God's sake, Alara, it's a toy. You can always make another one. Stop making everything so difficult. The verbal jabs became more frequent and cruel after that. My dedication to the workshop was no longer just a hobby. It was an unhealthy obsession. My grief was melodramatic. "You need to move on, Alara," my mother told me one night, her tone sharp with impatience. "Wallowing in that dusty old shed isn't going to bring him back. You should be focused on helping your sister during the happiest time of her life." They were trying to invalidate my grief to justify their own callousness, to make my pain an inconvenience that was getting in the way of their party planning. Then came the appraiser. I was in the workshop, trying to repair the dents Lily's boots had left on the rocking horse, when a man in a crisp suit knocked on the door. "Afternoon, miss. I'm here to appraise the outbuilding and its contents for a potential sale," he said cheerfully, holding up a clipboard. My blood ran cold. "A sale? I'm sorry. I think you have the wrong address. Nothing here is for sale." He looked confused, checking his papers. "My work order is from David and Karen Miller. They told me the property was being prepared for liquidation." I confronted my parents that evening, the appraiser's business card burning a hole in my pocket. My hands were shaking with a mixture of fear and rage. "You're selling the workshop? Without even telling me?" My father didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He just sighed, as if I were a difficult employee, not his daughter. "We're exploring our options," he said coldly. "Lily's wedding is going to cost a fortune, and we're not sitting on a gold mine, Alara. That property is a valuable asset we're not using." "I'm using it!" I cried, my voice cracking. "It's my inheritance from Grandpa. It's everything to me." "Your inheritance is a silly notion you got in your head from an old man's sentimental ramblings," my mother cut in, her voice like shards of glass. "The deed is in our name. Legally, it's ours to do with as we see fit. And right now, what we see fit is providing our daughter with the wedding she deserves." That night, I felt a despair so profound it was suffocating. They were going to take it all away. My sanctuary, my connection to my grandfather, my one place of peace. The one person I could have turned to was gone. I was completely alone. The next day, an old friend of my grandfather's, a retired cabinet maker named Arthur, stopped by. He had heard about Henry's passing and wanted to offer his condolences. He found me in the workshop, listlessly polishing a piece of wood, my eyes red and swollen. He saw the despair in my face. After a few minutes of quiet conversation, he looked around the workshop, a sad smile on his face. "He was worried this would happen, you know," Arthur said gently, his kind eyes full of sympathy. "Henry, he told me a few months before he passed. He said he was worried your parents saw this place as a dollar sign, not as a legacy. He said he was taking precautions." His words were like a key turning in a locked door in my mind. Taking precautions. What did that mean? Arthur didn't know the details, but his validation was a lifeline. I wasn't being oversensitive. I wasn't being selfish. My feelings were real, and my grandfather had seen this coming. He had known their true nature all along. The knowledge didn't erase the pain, but it ignited something new, a tiny flickering flame of resolve. I didn't know what his precautions were, but I knew I couldn't let them steamroll me. The fight wasn't just for a building, it was for him. I had thought I was at my breaking point, but I had no idea the final betrayal was still to come, and it would be the one to finally force my hand. The breaking point arrived on a Sunday evening. It was staged as a family meeting, a term in my house that always meant Lily was about to get something she wanted, and I was about to be told to sacrifice for it. The air in our home had been thick with unspoken tension for days, ever since the appraiser's visit. They had been avoiding me, speaking in hushed tones whenever I entered a room. This meeting, I knew, was not a negotiation. It was a verdict. I walked into the living room to find them all waiting for me. My father looking stern and important at the head of the dining table, my mother looking anxiously from him to me, and Lily, who was examining her engagement ring with a look of smug satisfaction. The scene was perfectly arranged to intimidate, to reinforce my position as the outsider. The empty chair they had left for me was at the far end of the table, physically separating me from their tight-knit circle. "Alara, sit down," my father said, his voice imbued with a false gravitas. It was the voice he used when he was about to close a sale, not the one a father should use with his daughter. It felt less like an invitation and more like a summons to a courtroom where I had already been found guilty. I sat, my hands clenched in my lap, my back ramrod straight. I could feel the cold dread coiling in my stomach. "As you know," he began, steepling his fingers in a gesture of paternal authority he hadn't earned, "we've been looking at the finances for Lily's wedding. And to be frank, the costs are significant. Your mother and I want to give your sister the day she has always dreamed of. She deserves it," my mother added, her voice trembling with what I now recognized as manufactured emotion. "After all her hard work." Hard work at what? I wasn't sure. "And we have found a way to make that happen," my father continued, his eyes finally meeting mine. They were cold, flat, and devoid of any empathy. "We've received a very generous offer on your grandfather's property. A developer wants to buy the land to build luxury condos. The offer is for $250,000. I stared at him, my throat closing up, the blood roaring in my ears. I had known this was coming, but hearing the words spoken aloud, so casually, so clinically, was like a punch to the gut. "You mean, you're selling the workshop?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement of defeat. "We've accepted the offer, yes," he confirmed, his tone clipped and businesslike. "The papers will be signed on Friday. They want to begin demolition by the end of the month." Demolition. The word hit me with the force of a physical blow. They weren't just selling it. They were going to erase it, pulverize my grandfather's legacy, his life's work, into dust and rubble. The thought of a bulldozer crashing through the walls he had built with his own hands, splintering the beams he had set in place, was a vision of such profound violation that I felt a wave of nausea. "You can't," I whispered, the words barely audible. "You can't do that. Grandpa built that place with his own hands. It's sacred." Lily finally spoke, her voice a weapon of condescension. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Ilara. It's a rickety old shed filled with your dusty projects. It's not sacred. It's an asset. And it's an asset that's going to give me the most beautiful day of my life. Frankly, you should be happy for me. This helps you too, you know. We'll be able to pay off some family debts." Happy for her? I looked at their faces, searching for a shred of understanding, a flicker of remorse. I found nothing. All I saw was a united front of selfish entitlement. They had weighed my heart against Lily's party and decided my heart was worthless. "This isn't about being happy for you, Lily," I said, my voice shaking but gaining strength. "This is about respecting Grandpa's memory. He would never have wanted this. We know what your grandfather would have wanted better than you," my mother snapped, her defensive tone sharp as a razor. "He would have wanted his granddaughter to be happy. This is what's best for the whole family." And that was it. That was the phrase that shattered the last vestiges of hope I had. For the whole family. My pain, my love, my connection to my grandfather, none of that was considered part of the family's well-being. I was an obstacle, an inconvenience to be managed, a small price to be paid for Lily's happiness. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The grief and despair that had been choking me for weeks didn't disappear, but it crystallized into something hard and clear. Anger. A cold, righteous anger. I looked at the three of them, my so-called family, and I saw them for what they were. Strangers who happened to share my blood. They had made their decision, and in doing so, they had just made mine for me. The quiet, accommodating Ilara was gone. She had been demolished along with the future of the workshop. I stood up from the table, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I simply looked at them, my expression unreadable. "I understand," I said, my voice unnervingly calm. They mistook my calmness for surrender. I could see the relief wash over my mother's face. But it wasn't surrender. It was the calm before the storm. I knew now what I had to do. Arthur's words echoed in my head. He was taking precautions. I just had to find them. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed while the house was quiet, the weight of their decision pressing down on me. Demolition. The word echoed in the silence. They were going to tear down my grandfather's hands, his laughter, his legacy. The thought was a physical torment. Before the sun rose, I slipped out of the house, the cool, damp air a shock to my system. I walked to the workshop, a flashlight cutting a nervous beam through the pre-dawn gloom. This might be my last chance. Part of me just wanted to say goodbye, to breathe in the scent of cedar and oil one last time. But a stronger part of me, fueled by a desperate, illogical hope, was on a mission. Precautions. What could he have done? He knew my parents. He knew their obsession with appearances and their casual cruelty towards me. He wouldn't have left me unprotected. He just wouldn't have. I ran my flashlight beam over every surface, my heart pounding with a frantic energy. The towering shelves of neatly organized lumber, the pegboard walls with the ghostly outlines of his tools, the faint smell of his pipe tobacco that still clung to the air. My search grew more desperate. I checked inside old paint cans, under loose floorboards, behind stacks of wood. I ran my hands along every wall, searching for a hidden compartment, a loose brick. Nothing. An hour passed. The sky began to lighten from black to a bruised purple. Defeated, I sank onto the stool in front of his workbench. This was the heart of the workshop. It was a massive, heavy piece he had built himself 50 years ago from solid oak. Its surface was a road map of his life, pocked with hammer marks, stained with varnish, and scarred by 1,000 slips of a chisel. It was the one piece of furniture I loved more than any other. My hand traced the familiar lines, my grief washing over me in a fresh wave. This was it. I had failed him. As my fingers ghosted over the wood, they brushed against a small, ornate knot on the front apron of the desk, just below the main surface. I had always loved that knot. It was shaped almost like a tiny star. As a child, I would press it for good luck before starting a new project. Acting on pure, childish instinct, I pressed it again. But this time, fueled by desperation, I pushed harder. I felt a faint click, almost imperceptible. And then, a thin, vertical line, finer than a hair, appeared in the wood next to the leg. A seam I had never seen before. My heart hammered against my ribs. With trembling fingers, I pried at the seam. A small, hidden panel, no bigger than a book, swung open on silent, beautifully crafted hinges. Inside the dark cavity was a large, oilskin-wrapped parcel tied with twine. My hands shook so badly I could barely untie the knot. I carefully unfolded the oilskin on the workbench. Inside were 3 things. The first was a thick, leather-bound ledger. I opened it. It was my grandfather's handwriting, neat and precise. The book was a meticulous record of every dollar my parents had borrowed from him over the past 20 years. The down payment for their first house they'd never repaid. The money to bail my father's first failed business venture out. The loan for Lily's first car. The list went on and on, each entry dated, with a note, loan, not a gift. The total at the bottom of the final page was staggering. Over $150,000. They weren't struggling financially. They were chronically irresponsible. The second was a long, sealed envelope addressed to me in his familiar, steady script. For Ilara, when you need it most. The third item took my breath away. It was an official-looking document, folded neatly. I unfolded it. It was a last will and testament, but it wasn't the same will my parents' lawyer had read. This one was dated just 6 months before he died. It was signed by him, and the signatures were witnessed and notarized by 2 people I recognized as his closest friends, including Arthur. It contained one crucial, game-changing clause. To my beloved granddaughter, Ilara Miller, I bequeath, separate and apart from all other assets of my estate, the freestanding workshop located at the rear of my property and all of its contents, tools, and machinery therein. This bequest is made in recognition of her talent, her dedication, and her spirit, which is the true continuation of my life's work. This structure is not to be considered part of the primary residential property for the purposes of estate liquidation. He had done it. The clever, wonderful man had legally separated the workshop from the house. It was mine. It had always been mine. I clutched the documents to my chest and finally allowed myself to cry. Not tears of sadness, but tears of profound, overwhelming gratitude and love. He hadn't abandoned me. He had armed me. The next morning, I didn't go to work. I went to the best probate lawyer in town. a woman named Catherine Albright, recommended by a friend. She was sharp, empathetic, and had a no-nonsense demeanor that I immediately trusted. I laid everything out on her polished mahogany desk. The new will, the ledger, the story of my family's betrayal. She examined the will carefully, her expression shifting from sympathy to professional focus. "This is ironclad, Miss Miller," she said, her eyes gleaming. "The notarization is legitimate. The witnesses are credible. This supersedes any previous will concerning this specific asset. The workshop is legally yours. They don't have a leg to stand on." "And the ledger?" I asked, my voice still hoarse. "While it may not be a legally binding loan document without your parents' signature," she explained, "it is a powerful piece of evidence. It establishes a clear pattern of financial dependency and irresponsibility. It completely demolishes their narrative that they need to sell the workshop to fund this wedding. It exposes their motive for what it is, pure greed. It gives you all the leverage. For the next 2 hours, we formulated a plan. It was not a plan for negotiation. It was a plan for a checkmate. Miss Albright would file the new will with the probate court immediately, which would put a legal freeze on any sale of the property. Then she would draft cease and desist letters to the developer and my parents. "But the real power," she said, leaning forward, her gaze intense, "will be in how you deliver this news. They have underestimated you your entire life. Now is the time to show them who you really are. You control the narrative now, Elara. You decide the time and the place." A cold, calm certainty settled over me. I knew exactly where the final confrontation had to be. It had to be in my workshop, my territory, my ground. The days of me being the quiet, accommodating daughter were over. It was time for the carpenter's daughter to build her own future and tear theirs down to the foundation. I waited 2 days, 2 agonizing days where I lived a double life. On the surface, I was the defeated daughter. I was quiet at meals. I nodded silently as Lily discussed seating charts. I allowed them to believe they had won. I could see the smug satisfaction in their eyes. They thought my silence was the sound of surrender. In reality, it was the sound of a well-oiled machine being assembled, each piece of my plan clicking into place. Miss Albright had filed the will. The legal gears were turning. All that was left was the final act. On Wednesday evening, I made my move. "I'd like to have one last look at the workshop before the sale is finalized," I announced calmly at the dinner table. "To pack up a few of Grandpa's things. I'd like it if you all came with me. To say goodbye properly." My mother's eyes filled with what looked like tears of gratitude. "Oh, Elara, that's so mature and understanding of you. Of course we will. It will be a nice moment of closure for all of us." Lily rolled her eyes but agreed, probably imagining it as one last chance to gloat in the space she was sacrificing for her big day. We walked out to the workshop in the fading evening light. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and sawdust. I unlocked the heavy wooden door, my door, and flicked on the overhead lights. The familiar space was cast in a warm, golden glow. It felt like a stage, and the final act was about to begin. I let them walk around, soaking it all in, their arrogance filling the sacred space. My father was already talking business, his voice booming with authority. "The developer said they can have a crew here to clear the lot in 2 weeks. It's amazing how fast they can work. We should have the check in hand by the end of the month." Lily was pointing at the large bandsaw. "Do you think we can sell some of this old junk for extra cash? Maybe for a honeymoon upgrade? I've always wanted to go to the Maldives." My mother was already redecorating the house in her head. "With the money from this, we can finally redo the kitchen. Those countertops are so dated." I let them talk for a few minutes, their voices echoing, desecrating the space with their greed. Each word was another log on the fire of my resolve. Then, I cleared my throat. "I actually brought you all here for another reason," I said. My voice was steady, louder than usual. It cut through their chatter and commanded their attention. They turned to look at me, their expressions shifting from arrogance to curiosity. I was standing behind my grandfather's workbench. I felt his strength, his presence, right there with me. On the bench in front of me was a single, plain file folder. "We need to talk about the sale," I said. There's nothing to talk about, sweetheart, my father said dismissively, reverting to his condescending pet name for me. The deal is done. Actually, it's not, I said, opening the folder with a deliberate slowness. Because you can't sell something that doesn't belong to you. I slid the first document across the workbench towards them. It was a copy of my grandfather's second will. My father picked it up, a frown creasing his forehead as if it were a minor inconvenience. He read it, his eyes scanning the first paragraph. Then he stopped. He read it again, his lips moving silently. His face went from confused to pale, the blood draining from it so fast he looked ill. What is this? This is not the will. It is, I said calmly, my voice like ice. It's the final, superseding will, dated 6 months ago. Notarized and witnessed by Arthur and John Kingsley. Miss Albright, my lawyer, filed it with the probate court this morning. As you can see, it clearly and unequivocally bequeaths the workshop and all its contents directly to me. It is legally separate from the house and the rest of the estate. My mother snatched the paper from his hand. Her eyes darted across the page, her mouth opening and closing silently like a fish out of water. No, she whispered, her voice a strangled sound. No, Henry wouldn't do that. He wouldn't go behind our backs to cheat his own family. End of trying. He didn't go behind your backs, I countered, my voice ringing with a strength I didn't know I possessed. He protected his legacy from the people he knew would try to destroy it. He knew you. He knew exactly who you were. Lily laughed, a shrill, nervous sound that echoed unnaturally in the large space. This is ridiculous. You probably forged this, Alara. You've been moping around in here for weeks. You're just jealous of my wedding and you're trying to ruin it. Oh, am I? I said, then slid the second document across the table. It was a copy of the ledger. I opened it to a bookmarked page. Let's talk about money. This is a ledger Grandpa kept for 20 years. A detailed record of every single dollar he loaned to you, Mom and Dad. Let's see. Here's one. August 2017. Loan to cover Lily's credit card debt. $5,200. Note. Promise to pay back, but I doubt I'll see it. Here's another. March 2019. Loan for a down payment on Dad's new car. $10,000. The list goes on and on. The grand total is over $150,000. My parents stared at the pages, their faces ashen. They were trapped, their lies and irresponsibility exposed by their own father's meticulous record-keeping. You don't need to sell this workshop to pay for a wedding, I continued, my voice rising with the passion I had suppressed for years. You have plenty of money. You're just greedy and irresponsible. You told me Grandpa would have wanted Lily to have her dream wedding. But this, I said, tapping the will, this is what he actually wanted. He wanted his life's work to be in the hands of the one person who valued it, who loved it, who earned it. My father found his voice, sputtering with a rage born of humiliation. This is an ambush! How dare you! After everything we've done for you, giving you a roof over your head! Everything you've done for me? I shot back, taking a step forward. You've dismissed me, belittled me, and treated me like a second-class citizen in my own home my entire life. You have celebrated her, I said, pointing a shaking finger at Lily. While you have tolerated me, you have funded her every whim while telling me my dreams were a waste of money. And now you have the audacity to try and sell the only thing my grandfather ever truly gave me? The only thing I ever truly cared about? I paused, taking a deep breath, letting the weight of my words settle in the dusty air. I then slid the final document across the table. It was the letter from Miss Albright. This is a cease and desist letter. It has been sent to your developer. The sale is off. And this, I said, looking each of them directly in the eye, is a notice of eviction, not from the house, from here, from this workshop. You are not welcome here anymore. This place is mine. The silence that followed was absolute. Lily was openly sobbing now, her fantasy wedding crumbling into a pile of non-refundable deposits before her eyes. My mother was slumped against a stack of lumber, looking utterly defeated, her face buried in her hands. My father stood rigid, his face a mask of impotent fury. a general with no army left to command. They had come to this workshop expecting to finalize their victory. Instead, they had walked directly into their own ruin. I had taken back my power, my inheritance, and my life. And as I stood there, surrounded by the legacy of the one man who had always believed in me, I had never felt stronger. "Get out!" I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. It was quiet, but it carried the weight of a lifetime of suppressed feelings. Now, for a moment, nobody moved. They were suspended in a tableau of shock, caught between disbelief and the stark reality of their defeat. My father opened his mouth, a sputtering protest forming on his lips, but one look at my face and he shut it again. The quiet, accommodating daughter he had known his whole life was gone. In her place was a woman made of the same unyielding oak as the workbench she stood behind. He was the first to turn and leave, his shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen before. He walked out the door without a backward glance, a defeated man. My mother followed, stumbling slightly, her sobs now audible in the quiet space, a pathetic sound that stirred no sympathy in me. Lily was the last to go. She stopped at the doorway and looked at me, her face a mess of tears and mascara. "I hate you," she spat, her voice thick with the venom of a dethroned princess. "The feeling is mutual," I replied, my voice as cold and hard as steel, and then I slid the heavy workshop door shut, the sound of the bolt locking into place echoing like a gunshot. The final, definitive end to an era. Alone in my sanctuary, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a profound sense of exhaustion and a strange, quiet peace. I walked through the space, running my hand over the tools, the lumber, the workbench. It was all mine, truly mine. I hadn't just saved a building. I had saved a part of myself. I sank onto the stool, laid my head down on the scarred wood of the bench, and breathed in the familiar scent. It smelled like home. It smelled like victory. The next few days were a blur of legal activity and frigid silence. Miss Albright was as good as her word. The developer, faced with a legally binding will and the threat of a lawsuit, backed out of the sale immediately, sending a terse letter to my father that I'm sure wounded his pride. My parents received a formal notice from my lawyer confirming my ownership of the workshop and warning them against any further attempts to interfere. The atmosphere in the house became arctic. My family treated me like a stranger, a hostile occupant in their home. They spoke in whispers when I entered a room and communicated with me only through terse, one-word answers. Lily refused to even look at me, spending her days locked in her room, presumably mourning her canceled party. The wedding was, for all intents and purposes, off the table. The non-refundable deposits they had paid for the Napa venue, the caterer, and the designer dress were lost. Their financial recklessness had finally caught up with them, and they had no one to blame but themselves. I knew I couldn't stay there. The house was no longer a home. It was a battleground. Every meal, a silent war. I spent every spare moment at the workshop, cleaning, organizing, and reclaiming the space as my own. I found an old cot in a storage closet, and some nights I would sleep there, bundled in old blankets, rather than face the suffocating tension of the house. In the quiet solitude of the workshop, I finally opened the last envelope from my grandfather, the letter addressed to me. Reading his words was like hearing his voice again, a warm and steady presence in the chaos. He wrote about his pride in me, his fears about my parents' greed, and his hope that the workshop would be my foundation, not my cage. "Don't let them make you small, Alara," he wrote. "Your talent is immense. They see this building as an asset to be sold, but you and I know the truth. It is a seed. Plant it, nurture it, and build your own life on your own terms. That is my true wish for you." His words gave me the final push I needed. The next day, I started looking for apartments. Within a week, I found a small, sunlit studio apartment above a quiet bookstore, just a 15-minute drive from the workshop. It wasn't much, but the landlord was a kind, older woman who loved the smell of old books and said she wouldn't mind the smell of sawdust. It was perfect. The day I moved out was quiet and anticlimactic. I packed my few belongings into my old car. My parents watched from the living room window, their faces unreadable masks. No one offered to help. No one said goodbye. As I drove away, I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. I was driving toward my future, a future I would build with my own two hands, just as my grandfather had taught me. The silence in my car wasn't lonely. It was the sound of freedom. 1 year can change everything. A year ago, I was a ghost in my family's house, a silent, heartbroken girl fighting for the scraps of my grandfather's legacy. Today, I am the proud owner and master craftsman of Henry's Legacy Woodworks. My life is unrecognizable, and it is more beautiful, more solid, and more real than I could have ever imagined. The workshop is no longer just a sanctuary. It's a thriving business. After moving into my apartment, I poured all my energy, grief, and passion into my craft. I started small, selling custom-made cutting boards and small furniture pieces at local craft markets. I built a simple website, taking photos of my work in the beautiful natural light of the workshop. Word of mouth spread quickly. My attention to detail, the quality of my work, all the things my grandfather taught me resonated with people who were tired of mass-produced disposability. A feature in a local design blog went viral, and suddenly, I was inundated with commissions. My first big commission was for a 10-foot-long dining table made from a single slab of reclaimed walnut. The clients were a young couple who had just bought their first home. They cried when they saw it. They said it wasn't just a table. It was the heart of their new home, a place where their own family's memories would be made. That was the moment I knew I wasn't just building furniture. I was building a part of people's lives. I now have a 6-month waiting list for custom tables and heirloom quality furniture. I've even hired a part-time apprentice, a young woman fresh out of design school named Maya who has the same fire in her eyes that I once did. The workshop is filled with the sounds of creation again, not just my own, but of a new generation. My small studio apartment is now a real home, filled with plants, books, and pieces of furniture I've built myself. It's a space that reflects who I am, not who my family wanted me to be. The peace I feel when I walk through my own front door, a door that I can lock and that no one can enter without my permission, is something I will never take for granted. I have friends, a community of fellow artisans, a life that is full and authentic. My relationship with my family, on the other hand, is structured. After I moved out, the full weight of their financial reality came crashing down on them. Without the sale of the workshop, they were left with the massive, non-refundable deposits for Lily's canceled wedding. I learned through Arthur that they had to take out a second mortgage on their house to cover the debt. The irony was not lost on me. In their attempt to fund a fantasy, they had jeopardized their own real-world security. Lily did get married to Marcus, but it was not the Napa Valley extravaganza she had dreamed of. It was a small, joyless ceremony at the local courthouse with only a handful of guests. Arthur's wife, who is friends with a cousin of ours, told me the bride wore an off-the-rack dress and didn't smile once. Their marriage, built on a foundation of materialism and entitlement, began to crack almost immediately under the strain of their new financial reality. Marcus, it turned out, was less charming when he wasn't being bankrolled by his fiancée's parents. They are still together, but from what I hear, their life is a constant, bitter argument about money. Lily works a retail job she despises to help pay the bills, the shine of her golden child status permanently dulled by the harsh fluorescent lighting of the department store. About 6 months ago, my mother called me, crying. It was the day they signed the papers for the second mortgage. She apologized. It wasn't a perfect apology, it was laced with self-pity and blame for the ridiculous cost of weddings, but there was a sliver of genuine remorse in her voice. I never realized. I never thought about what that workshop meant to you. Not really, she'd admitted. My father has remained stubbornly silent, his pride too great to admit he was wrong. I have established firm boundaries. We see each other once a month for a civil dinner at a neutral restaurant. I do not lend them money. I do not get involved in their drama. Our conversations are superficial, the weather, local sports, but they are peaceful. Perhaps, over time, something more genuine can be rebuilt. But it will be on a foundation of respect, not obligation. The ledger my grandfather left remains in a safe deposit box. They know I have it. It's a powerful, unspoken presence in our new dynamic. They know it represents not just their financial debts, but their moral ones. It's a guarantee that they will never again mistake my kindness for weakness. Justice, I've learned, doesn't always come with a thunderclap. Sometimes it's a quiet, slow-moving current that pulls people toward the consequences they've earned. My family didn't end up in ruin, but they were forced to live in the world they had created. A world of debt, disappointment, and fractured relationships. I, on the other hand, wanted only a place to honor my grandfather and pursue my passion. And in fighting for that, I ended up with everything: a successful business, a peaceful home, and a profound sense of self-worth. Sometimes, I stand in the workshop late at night, the only light coming from the lamp over the old oak workbench. I run my hand over its scarred surface and think about the secret it held. My grandfather didn't just leave me a building or a collection of tools. He left me a roadmap. He taught me that true inheritance isn't about what's left to you, but what's left inside you. He left me his skill, his integrity, and the courage to fight for my own legacy. And for that, I am eternally grateful. The greatest lesson was not just about them, but about me. For years, I had accepted their definition of my worth. The betrayal, as painful as it was, forced me to see the truth. Their judgment was a reflection of their own limitations, not mine. It was the catalyst that pushed me out of the shadows and into a life of my own making, a life that is sturdy, beautiful, and built to last. Looking back, I realize my grandfather's final gift wasn't the will he hid in the workbench. It was the choice he gave me. The choice to stay quiet and accept injustice, or the choice to stand up and fight, not just for a piece of property, but for my own value. The wood he taught me to shape is strong, but I learned that the human spirit, when fighting for what it loves, is even stronger. The process of woodworking itself became a metaphor for my own healing. I had to sand away the rough, painful surfaces of my past, join the broken pieces of my confidence back together, and apply a finish that would protect me from future harm. The greatest betrayal didn't break me. It forced me to build myself anew, from the ground up. My life now is rich in ways that have nothing to do with a bank account. It's rich with the satisfaction of hard work, the joy of creation, and the peace that comes from living an authentic life. I learned that family isn't always about blood. It's about who respects you, who believes in you, and who stands by you. My chosen family is now made up of friends like Arthur, my apprentice Maya, and my loyal customers. And I've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family of origin is to draw a line in the sawdust and refuse to let them cross it until they are ready to respect it. Have you ever had to fight for something a loved one left you? Whether it was a physical object or a cherished memory? What did you learn from that experience? Share your stories in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to hear more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges and finding your own strength. Remember to share this video with someone who might need a reminder that their passion is valid and their worth is not determined by anyone else's opinion. Thank you for listening, and may you always have the courage to build the life you deserve.